Days after the Israeli strikes in Qatar, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has defended his decision, defended his military action against another sovereign country and attacking another sovereign country in the heart of its capital. In fact, Prime Minister Netanyahu drew parallels to what was the American response to the 9/11 attacks. He said, and he urged countries that are harboring terrorists either to expel those terrorists or to bring them to justice, warning that Israel will take action if nations are flying thick and fast from both sides. Qatar has accused the Israeli Prime Minister of leading the Middle East into chaos. The question is, what happens next? What happens to this process of normalization that Israel was on, along with its Arab neighbors? It happened with the Abraham Accords with UAE and Bahrain. Saudi Arabia was supposed to be next. Has that been completely blown out of the water? Israel attempted to kill senior members of Hamas in an airstrike on Tuesday in Qatar. This led to a sharp escalation that brought the Middle East into the brink of yet another war. This was the first time that Israel struck a close American ally and, more importantly, one of the primary mediators involved in the negotiations between Israel and Hamas to end the Gaza war. The Israeli strike happened on a Hamas meeting where the terror group was discussing a ceasefire proposal backed by US President Donald Trump. It happened in a residential complex, even as the officials had gathered there for the negotiations over how to end the Gaza war. The direct attack on Qatar's territory also risked antagonizing the Qatari government and also destabilizing diplomatic efforts. Qatar's political and economic stability hinges on its reputation as a safe haven for business and tourism. The Tuesday afternoon attack by Israel's Air Force hit an area in the capital Doha that is very close to schools and embassies and residential complexes. It sent black smoke billowing into the air. The hit itself was at a residential apartment complex where the negotiators had gathered. Hamas said that the Israeli strike had failed to kill senior Hamas officials without specifying whether those individuals had sustained injuries. In a statement, the group confirmed that the son of Khalil al-Hayya, who is the chief negotiator for Hamas, the office manager, and 3 other people affiliated with Hamas had been killed, but the main negotiator, al-Hayya, had managed to escape. But the strike happened to kill a member of Qatar's internal security forces as well as injure a number of civilians. And that prompted a sharp rebuke from the Qatari Prime Minister. Qatar will continue its role as a mediator in the war. Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, the country's Prime Minister, said right after the attack. But he added that the Gulf state has also formed a legal team to determine how to respond to Israel's wanton and illegal attack. In fact, the Qatari Prime Minister denounced Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, calling him out by name.
إن الهجوم الإسرائيلي اللي تم اليوم على أرض قطر ويعني لا نستطيع أن نسميه إلا بإرهاب دولة يمارسه شخص مثل نتنياهو في سياق هذه السياسات الممنهجة ومحاولاته المستمرة لزعزعة الأمن والاستقرار الإقليمي، هي فقط رسالة واضحة للمنطقة ككل. وهذه الرسالة تقول أن هناك لاعب مارق في هذه المنطقة، وهناك عربدة سياسية مستمرة في هذه المنطقة وانتهاك لسيادة الدول. نتنياهو بنفسه صرح بأنه سيعيد تشكيل الشرق الأوسط. هل هذه الرسالة بأنه سيعيد تشكيل الخليج أيضا؟
President Trump gave a conflicting account on when exactly his administration knew about the Israeli strike. First, he said on social media that the US military had informed his administration that Israel was attacking Hamas in Doha in Qatar. Then he said that he immediately directed his Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, to inform the Qataris of the attack. But by the time Witkoff had informed the Qataris, he had done so too late to stop the attack. Trump also said he had spoken to both Benjamin Netanyahu along with the Emir of Qatar right after the attack.
Well, I'm not thrilled. I'm not thrilled about it. I don't have to do that. I'm not thrilled about the whole situation. It's not a good situation. But I will say this, we want the hostages back, but we are not thrilled about the way that went down today.
You were caught by surprise, sir?
I'm never surprised by anything. especially when it comes to the Middle East. I'll be giving a full statement tomorrow, but I would tell you this. I was very unhappy about it, very unhappy about every aspect, and we got to get the hostages back. But I was very unhappy about the way that went down.
The Qatari Prime Minister said that the United States had not warned Qatar ahead of the attack, and in fact the warning came until 10 minutes after the attack happened. He accused the Israeli government of trying to sabotage every attempt to create opportunities for peace. Israeli officials have vowed to kill Hamas leaders who were involved in the planning of the October 7, 2023 attack on southern Israel, which was the trigger point, which is what ignited the war in Gaza. In that attack, over 1,200 Israelis were killed and 250 of them taken hostage. A week ago, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, who is the Israeli military's chief of staff, suggested that Israel was focused on attacking not just Hamas in Gaza, but also Hamas officials in the wider region. Hamas representatives met on Monday with the Qatari Prime Minister to discuss Trump's proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza. The group had then planned to convene again on Tuesday to further talk about that proposal. That is when the Israeli strike happened. Netanyahu has said that Israel was willing to end the war, but only if Hamas releases all the remaining hostages, disarms itself, and Gaza is demilitarized. All of these are conditions which Hamas has publicly opposed. Israel believes there are still about 20 hostages who are alive out of the 50 remaining in Hamas custody. But as the diplomatic storm kicked up between Israel and Qatar, Israel appeared to try to distance the United States from the attack itself. In fact, Israel said that this was a wholly independent Israeli operation and had nothing to do with America.
At noon today, I convened the heads of Israel's security organizations and authorized a surgical precision strike on the terrorist chiefs of Hamas. These are the same terrorist chiefs who planned, launched, and celebrated the horrific massacres of October 7th.
Thousands of American soldiers are stationed at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which also happens to be the regional headquarters of the U.S. Central Command. And Qatar agreed to host an office for Hamas in Doha at the request of the United States. Qatar has previously played a role in negotiating between America and the Taliban before the Taliban took power in Afghanistan in 2021. Qatar was thought to be neutral ground, in part because it has diplomatic contacts with the Israeli government. Senior Israeli government officials have traveled quite often to Qatar. In fact, a number of occasions in the last couple of years since this war began. They've been speaking with Qatari leaders about securing the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza. In fact, Qatar was one of the 3 mediators in the negotiations between Israel and Hamas, along with the United States and Egypt, who are the other 2. The willingness to attack Qatar's capital could also undermine Israel's long-standing efforts to build ties with Gulf Arab countries that it views as potential allies against Iran. Israel had normalized ties with the UAE and Bahrain through the Abraham Accords and was hoping to do so with Saudi Arabia when October 7th happened. But the Tuesday strike made Qatar, as well as other Gulf countries, appear much more vulnerable to external attacks. Now, this is despite the fact that Qatar has invested billions of dollars in American military equipment. In his recent visit there, the Qataris presented President Trump with a luxury Boeing 747 jet. The Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar was attacked by Iran back in June during the Iran-Israel war, although that strike was largely thwarted by American defense systems. But the Israeli strike now is being seen as a major act of provocation and could possibly lead to yet another war in a region which is already plagued by numerous wars over the last couple of years. So this has become a huge geopolitical sort of face-off between Qatar and Israel now, so much so Israel is alleging that there is some foreign flying object, an aircraft or a missile of some form that's been discovered over southern Israeli skies. I want to go across to Dr. Emmanuel Navon, who's a political scientist. You heard from the Qatari Prime Minister. He says this is an outright violation of the UN Charter of Article 2.4, which prohibits explicitly the threat or the use of force against the territorial integrity or the political sovereignty of any member state. And the Qataris are saying, by doing what it did Israel back on Tuesday, it has violated Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Why should it not be seen that way?
No. Because it's a lie from the Qatari Prime Minister or leader you just quoted. Qatar is a state that sponsors terrorism, that finances the Muslim Brotherhood, that is the main source of terror and instability in the Middle East. It funds the Hamas, it hosts them, and Hamas are terrorists. It's a terrorist organization recognized as such by most governments in the world. It funds the anti-Western and Muslim Brotherhood propaganda via Al Jazeera. And because it hosts the Hamas terrorists, it was a legitimate target, the same way, by the way, that Osama bin Laden was a legitimate target after doing 9/11, and today is 9/11, today is September 11, even though technically, yes, the United States violated the sovereignty of Pakistan, but Pakistan was hosted a terrorist the same way as Qatar was hosting the Hamas terrorists.
But Dr. Navon, I'm no fan of Qatar, but the point is that the Hamas office in Doha was opened at the behest of the United States. The attack happened right in the heart of Doha. If that is not a violation of territorial integrity and sovereignty, and by the way, why are Israeli negotiators traveling to Qatar? They've traveled in the last 2 years, almost 2 years since the October 7th attacks, innumerable occasions to Qatar, because Qatar is one of the primary mediators to try and find a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. If it was a terror state, why are your diplomats traveling there?
Well, why is that any different from the United States eliminating Osama bin Laden in Pakistan? I don't understand. When a country hosts terrorists, it becomes a legitimate target of eliminating those terrorists. And by the way, talking about the UN Charter also recognizes the right of self-defense in Article 51. And eliminating terrorists in a country that hosts them is an act of self-defense.
So why were you engaging with Qatari negotiators for the better part of the last 2 years if they are members representing a terrorist state?
Well, because the world is not black and white, sir. Qatar had and still has a lot of leverage on Hamas, and the only way we could approach Hamas to try and liberate our hostages was to talk to those evil people. Unfortunately, there was no other way.
So it was fine to talk to them for 2 years, use their mediation services for 2 years, and then finally attack them on their own soil.
Well, I think that this operation should have taken place much earlier. I'm sorry that it took 2 years to get rid of the Hamas leadership in Qatar, because if you remember, on October 7th, this whole leadership was filmed in Qatar praying and praising the attack of October 7th. Basically, those people were celebrating the burning alive, the beheading and the rape of Israelis.
What do you say to the argument that the Qatari Prime Minister has also said that now Israel's pretty much lost any chance of saving its hostages?
He's a hypocrite, because there was no chance of saving them via negotiations, because Qatar is not an honest broker. Qatar is siding and supporting one of the sides, which is Hamas. And Qatar was never, unfortunately, a reliable broker. It has been able to...
So if it comes true, God forbid, if it comes true that the remaining 20-odd hostages who Israel believes are alive in Gaza are killed because of this attack that Israel carried out on Qatar, then who is to take the fault for it? Is it Benjamin Netanyahu who ordered those strikes? Is it the Prime Minister of Qatar who hosted Hamas?
It is Hamas.
Or is it the Hamas negotiator that you failed to kill? Who takes responsibility for those hostages if they're killed?
Sir, who kidnapped them? Israel did not kidnap them. They were kidnapped by Hamas. They're the one holding them, and Hamas has been refusing any compromise in the past few months. And by the way, part of the fault comes to Western leaders who decided a couple of months ago to reward Hamas with the recognition of a so-called Palestinian state, which led Hamas to basically strengthen its position and say, well, we're not going to negotiate because we just had this amazing diplomatic achievement. So if you want to know why Hamas is not negotiating anymore, go ask Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, and the Prime Minister
What about Donald Trump? He says it was not his decision. It was squarely Mr. Netanyahu's decision alone. What do you have to say to him?
He's right. Israel made that decision, that correct decision. The government of Israel, by the way, not only Netanyahu, we are a parliamentary system. The decision was made by the Israeli cabinet. It was an Israeli operation. It was not an American one, by the way. Unlike
And the fallout and the responsibility for the fallout of that attack, if it leads to, God forbid, again, and no one wants the hostages, any harm on the hostages, but if the fallout of this attack is the death of these hostages, that is somehow not on Netanyahu, not on his cabinet.
You keep blaming Israel for the fate of those hostages. Again, they've been kidnapped by Hamas with the support of Qatar, right? It is Hamas who is holding them, who kidnapped them and is holding them and is refusing to release them. So Israel has no other choice but to defeat this evil organization. And that's why we have our soldiers in Gaza risking their lives to try and rescue them. Who is going to rescue them?
Dr.
Not
Navon,
Qatar.
we wish you all the very best, and I hope those hostages come back alive. I really do. I was in Israel a few weeks ago, and this was the single biggest issue. The hostages had to be back, and the war had to end. Unfortunately, I'm not sure, because of the events of this last few days, whether those hostages' safety is actually bettered or has become worse because of the actions of the Israeli government. We'll leave it at that. Dr. Emmanuel Navon is a political scientist from Israel.